Good morning, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish from Kentucky Youth Advocates. It is wonderful to see all of you this morning, and I'm really excited to hear from our panelists about this topic. So just a reminder that we are recording today's forum to share as both a video and a podcast. And because of that, we ask that you stay muted and also encourage you to drop any questions or comments that you have into the chat. And as best I can, I will pull questions from the chat to pass along to our moderator, or our panelists may address those in the chat itself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Terry Brooks.
Hey, Jesse, thanks so much, and welcome everybody, whether you're one of our Wednesday morning regulars or it's the first time you've joined us. We're so happy to have you. If you've been here frequently, I bet you know where I'm going, which is that we at KYA have what we believe is a simple but profound vision. We want Kentucky to be the best place in America to be young. And anything that gets in the way of a single kid realizing that vision, we're going to tackle, whether that is disparities that emanate from a young person's zip code, whether that's disparities that emanate from a young person's skin color, or whether those are disparities and discrimination that emanate from their gender identity. We as an organization, and I hope you as part of this team, agree that we have to make a commitment to go after any form of disparity in any form of discrimination. So today we want to hold up the issue of how young people who identify as LGBT may be faring in Kentucky. It's important to contextualize that. Some 26,000 young people in Kentucky aged 13 to 17 identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. Almost 2,000 young people in that demographic identify as transgender. So while our perspective would be that if a single kid has issues because of their identification, then we have to be on it. But you put those numbers alongside that commitment, and there are a lot of young people who are counting on all of you, and especially our panelists, to deliver a positive future for them. So that's the theme today. That's the focus today. I want to thank our panelists for taking time to be here and lending their wisdom and heart. I thank all of you because I know every one of you has a busy day, and it means a lot that you're joining us. My colleague, Carli, is going to facilitate this. So, Ms. Mosby, take it away.
Thanks so much, Terry. So yeah, we're really excited about the panelists we have for you all today. And to err on the side of caution, I always mess up introductions. So to err on the side of caution, I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about what they do, and how that relates to older youth and young adults that identify as LGBTQ+, which is the conversation we're having today. So Rick, I'll start with you. If you want to introduce yourself, and then Eltuan, once he's done, you can introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Carli. I appreciate the time here and everyone's discussion. I think this is an incredibly important topic, and I'm just really happy that Kentucky Youth Advocates is making some room for this conversation and for everyone's presence this morning. So my name is Rick Wurth, and I'm Chief Executive Officer here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, CH&K Behavioral Health. We've been assisting vulnerable families and youth since 1882 here in Northern Kentucky. And we have quite an expansive array of outpatient services and residential services. we're part of the Face It movement. That's an ally and partner with Kentucky Youth Advocates. We are focused on ending child abuse and child neglect in Kentucky and making sure that we at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky have the right services at the right time, at the right place, and at the right level of treatment need to interrupt this multi-generational situation of child abuse and child neglect. I have spent, I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. I'm a Western Kentucky kind of guy. I moved up to Northern Kentucky in the 1980s to attend Thomas More College, now Thomas More University. I entered the Catholic seminary when I was 18 years old. Took a little break at one point when I was getting my master's degree. I started teaching high school, so I have some experience in the high school classroom. Went on to be ordained a Catholic priest for the Diocese of Covington, Kentucky, spent 10 years in the priesthood, and had some life events that invited me to investigate a new chapter of life. And I was fortunate enough to come and be a part of this community here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky. I started as Vice President for Development in 2010 here at CH&K. And in 2012, the Board of Trustees asked me to become the Chief Executive Officer, and I was happy and honored to do so. This discussion today on LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ families and the child welfare arenas and also other arenas such as juvenile justice is really important to me. It hits a really close nerve to me. I'm an out gay man. I'm happily married to a wonderful husband. We've been together since the 1980s and got married when the Supreme Court decision allowed marriage equality in the land. So I can plug in very personally to some of the issues that we're going to be discussing. I came from a very stable family, but I also came from a very conservative family in Western Kentucky. And I know what it feels like personally to be on the receiving end and experience some of the social isolation, prejudice, and discrimination that's specific to LGBTQ populations. So it's just really a pleasure to be with you for what I consider a really pivotal discussion for vulnerable youth and families in our Commonwealth.
Thanks so much, Rick, for sharing that with us, and looking forward to hearing more about some of the insights that you can share with us today. Let's go to Eltuan, if you don't mind introducing yourself as well.
Hi, thanks, Carli. My name is Eltuan Dawson. I'm 26 years old. I am a community youth development coach. Basically, that just means that I advocate for youth and young adults across the spectrum. I participate in a lot of panel discussions and just give voice to what's needed in our community for our young people and how better we can engage with our young people and keep engaged with our young people.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eltuan. Eltuan is indeed a great advocate for our youth and young adults in our communities. And I'm sure you have, if you've been on any of our forums before, you may have heard him speak. We love his insights as well. So I just want to take, to start this discussion off, we never want to start with a deficit discussion. We want to really focus on the assets that we have in our communities and solutions to benefit this population. But I think it is really good for us to kind of start with kind of the landscape for our older youth and young adults that do identify as LGBTQ+. So Rick or Eltuan, whichever one is, or both who want to address this, what is that general landscape? What does that look like? What are some of the challenges out there that our young people that identify as LGBTQ+ are facing? And specifically, how does that show up in the different systems that our youth tend to be involved in, such as child welfare, Rick specifically in the child welfare system, or Eltuan with your experiences with Sweet Evening Breeze and houselessness. So I'll open that up to either one of you.
Eltuan, please.
I'll definitely go ahead and get it started. Okay, so, well, if you haven't heard of Sweet Evening Breeze, we are 18-24 focused for youth and young adults. We will be the only LGBTQ plus shelter in Louisville. One could argue that many organizations across the community aren't equipped to deal with all members of the LGBTQ plus community, but we want to help change that. Currently, we're not operating in a space. However, we are able to provide active resources by referrals to community partners like Safe Place, the police department, etc. We also work with Home of the Innocents to provide our homeless population with supplies and toiletries. By the end of the summer, we do hope to start providing resources in occupational therapy, trans education, HIV and AIDS education as well. The need for these resources could answer that question, Carli. The need for needle exchange services or trans education, because we don't know much about. It's hard to understand ourselves alone sometimes. It's definitely going to be hard for us to understand other people outside of ourselves, especially if we are unfamiliar with this concept of a sex change, for instance. So there's education out there for us. And we just want to be able to provide that knowledge so that we can make the world a safer place for everyone. It's difficult.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Eltuan. I was just going to piggyback on your comments there. And Carli, for sure, here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, we have been certified in the sanctuary model for trauma-informed care. And one of our tools in our toolkit for trauma-informed care is something called a red flag meeting. It's our way of addressing a problem in our community that other mechanisms and normal solutions have not handled. And one of the rules that we have when we do a red flag meeting here at Children's Home is that we spend 25% on the problem, 75% of the time on the solution, so that it doesn't just become a festival around, oh my God, look at this deficit, look at this problem. And so I take your comments to heart. So I would say, as we get started here, there's good news, there's bad news, and there's good news. The good news is that since 2012, LGBTQ Americans have seen really some tremendous strides in terms of protections in the workplace, more inclusive healthcare, public opinion has shifted, marriage equality has hit our culture here in the United States. Even in social media and in entertainment, LGBTQ characters are being portrayed in some of the most positive light ever in our country. So all of that is good news. The bad news is that there's still work to be done. So I know there are so many people here who consider themselves advocates and allies. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is a really important study that was commissioned from the National Human Rights Campaign, and it was done in conjunction with the University of Connecticut. It was one of the largest studies. I'm going to be using some of it today for our conversation. But the study actually started in 2012. It's entitled Growing Up LGBTQ in America. You can Google it, HRC, Growing Up LGBT in America. And so it was refreshed in 2017 and 2018. So there has been progress, but what are the opportunities right now? So according to this survey that included 12,000 LGBTQ teenagers across the United States, all 50 states were represented, including Washington, D.C., ages 13 to 17, 12,000 respondents. The research revealed this: 77% of LGBTQs, teenagers participating in the study reported feeling depressed or down during the week that they took the survey. 95% of these youth reported trouble sleeping at night. LGBTQ youth of color and transgender youth that Eltuan was mentioning experience unique challenges and elevated stress. Only 11% of youth of color surveyed believed that their racial or ethnic group was regarded positively in the United States. Just three more little statistics from a general perspective. More than 70% of LGBTQ youth participating in the study reported feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. Only 26% say they feel safe in their schools. So Terry started this conversation out by saying what an incredible goal it would be that children, young people, adolescents, young adults feel safe. For those of you who are in the field with me of trauma-informed care, physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety are really the building blocks for us to reduce the number of adverse childhood experiences and that lead to some of the incredible numbers of abuse and neglect statistics we're dealing with in the Commonwealth. What a tragedy that only 26% of these 12,000 respondents say they feel safe in their classrooms. Only 5% of the respondents in this survey said that they feel safe enough to reach out to teachers and school staff whom they are convinced to be supportive. 67% report that they've heard family members make negative comments about LGBTQ people. Once again, I can reiterate that feeling. I came from a very religious family in Western Kentucky. By all standards, I came from a good family, a solid family. We were respected in the community. And yet I can remember growing up, even in this very religious family, hearing both racist language and anti-LGBTQ language. So we have some work to do. Here's maybe the piece that will propel us for the rest of the discussion, and that is the topic of resiliency. One of the things that I realized here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, we have a significant portion of our employee population who constitute persons of color. And we also have a significant number of employees who identify as LGBTQ. And I can tell you, resiliency is real and strong and loud. So we have the resiliency if we can muster the determination to start some systemic changes in the arena of LGBTQ culturally competent care for youth that are involved in out-of-home care in Kentucky, in juvenile justice, and really throughout the educational arena around the state.
Thank you for adding that trauma-informed piece, Rick.
Yeah, really important. I think that has become certainly a hot button phrase. I think sometimes it can be thrown around lightly. Everyone is trauma informed now, but it really does take some serious work, not just individually, but as a community, to really be trauma informed and really to navigate those discussions around safety and to switch the question from what's wrong with these LGBTQ kids, what's wrong, to what happened to them, right? Step one is shifting our mindset as adults and helping professionals from let me try to apply a diagnosis to this kid. This certainly happens, my experience there at the Children's Home. So many times, kids are coming into our care after being in other residential care environments, after having multiple foster care placements, and so many times you'll look at the paperwork coming in and there's an array of clinical diagnoses, right? And sometimes the matter is the kid is gay. The kid identifies as LGBTQ. And he or she doesn't have the issue. It's everybody around him. And in order so many times to provide support and care to these kids, and then to be having providers paid for that care, we have to slap these clinical diagnoses onto this client in order to help, right? So many times I think that we really do ourselves a disservice in really masking the question, who has the problem here?
That's exactly right, Rick. And I have a little experience as a Foster alumni, just traveling from place to place to place in these different environments where LGBTQ is not accepted and is looked down upon, and you're treated differently. And like you said, there are many diagnoses that can be given, but where's the actual conversation happening, right? And I was fortunate enough to have someone, a great support person in the field, sit me down and have a conversation with me. Much needed. I think that that's how we can help fix. Talked about, Rick, what we're looking at, what happened. We're not just looking at what happened. How can we fix what happened? How can we no longer let that happen again because of the trauma that comes out of that, right? In the dissociation that one might feel from dealing with those situations.
Yeah, I'm really I'm loving where you all are taking this conversation, because I think something you mentioned, Rick, was, how do we create those systemic changes, around cultural competency when it comes to working with those older youth and young adults that identify as LGBTQ plus youth. And, I'm just curious, what does that look like? How do we instill that systemic change, or those cultural changes, even within our organizations or within our smaller arenas, so that we can then go out and try to create, a broader cultural competency in this area? What does that look like?
Well, I'll start that response, Carli, if I may. I think one of the things that we have to do, there are so many incredible partners in this conversation. I'm looking in this room right now and see some of the state's most brilliant people here and some of the most prestigious organizations. And it's incredible to see that. I'm going back to our sanctuary model work here at Children's Home. And one of the things that we realized very quickly, one of the things that the sanctuary model brings to the forefront is that if trauma-informed care is simply confined to Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, we've dropped the ball. The ball is to create a trauma-informed community outside of these four walls. To create a trauma-informed law enforcement community, to create a trauma-informed judicial system, to create a trauma-informed educational system in Kentucky. This is not simply about places like Children's Home or Ramey East Step or Home of the Innocents or any one of these other beautiful providers, Maryhurst Becoming Trauma-Informed. If we stop there, if that's our focus area, bad news. We have got to become the flower pots of a beautiful vine that is growing outside of our organizations, and to use biblical references, becoming leaven and salt of trauma-informed care for the wider community. One of the things, once again, I'm not that brilliant, guys, with technology, so I apologize that I'm showing you this just on my camera. But we have this picture everywhere at Children's Home. And many of you are probably going to be familiar with what we call the pair of ACEs. And all of us are trying to address adverse childhood experiences. And there are multiple examples: emotional sexual abuse, substance abuse, maternal depression, physical and emotional neglect, divorce. I'm pretty much convinced that everybody here has heard about adverse childhood experiences. What I don't think that we talk enough about in Kentucky is that the fact that those adverse childhood experiences grow out of adverse community environments. If we are really serious as part of the Face It movement, and we are, if we're really serious about our work as Kentucky Youth Advocate Partners, if we're really serious about our work in child welfare, we cannot be silent about adverse community environments. In other words, we can't allow forces in Kentucky to say, hey, child welfare providers, go over and sit at the little table because it's proverbially Thanksgiving and all the adults are going to be at the big table. And you people that deal with kids, you go over there and you sit at the little table and you take care of them and stay quiet. So I get passionate about that. I'm a 54-year-old gay man. I'm not sitting at the little kids' table, right? I'm sitting at the big boys' table, at the big girls' table. And we have got to start using our voices collectively to address adverse community environments. And quite simply, the topic of today's conversation is that homophobia is truly an adverse community environment in Kentucky that has devastating health consequences. It's that simple.
Piggybacking off of Rick here too, and more to that point, you mentioned engaging with young people, how the community engages with young people. We need to pay attention to that trauma-informed piece. That's the first step. Get the education. We need to share the education. We need to learn more, put ourselves in the education environment some more so that we know more about what's going on. And we can be more aware and we can be more preventative and intervene at an appropriate time. This is how you practice trauma resilience. This is how you practice the trainings that you are in constantly. You have to focus on your engagement with the young people. How are you traumatizing them now?
Yeah. And I would say that sometimes, right, I'm big on the fact, as I shared with you guys, I spent most of my life in a seminary and in priesthood. And I was trained a lot in theology. And I realized at one point I was trained the fact that sins come in two flavors. You can have an act of commission, I did something I shouldn't have done, or omission, I didn't do something I should have done, right? And on that topic, I would just like to say that one of the ways that homophobia as an adverse community environment continues in Kentucky is by not talking about it, right? So many times people will ask me, Rick, how many kids in state custody are you serving who identify as LGBTQ? And you know what the most honest answer is? Who knows? Because we don't ask the question, right? We have not paid attention to capturing data on that population. It's part of the whole movement of out of sight, out of mind, which leads to social isolation and ostracization of our LGBTQ kids in care. And I know that is a fine art, because I know that if somebody had asked me as a young man, as a young boy, I knew I was different. Kids, you do not start to come to realize that you're different in college. Most people that you talk to identify as LGBTQ knew very early in life. But if someone, even a trusted adult, even if one of my teachers had said, Rick, are you gay? Do you identify as LGBTQ? That question would have terrified me, because I knew enough as a kid to be very careful on how to share that information. So we have a conundrum, right? On one hand, we don't have this basic data set in Kentucky to really know what the actual numbers are of those who identify as LGBTQ, because we're not asking the questions, but we have to ask those questions in the right way, so that when kids are coming into care here at Children's Home, for example, because we are part of another movement called the All Children, All Families movement. That is a program that is under the umbrella of the National Human Rights Campaign Foundation. HRC is the largest LGBTQ advocacy in the United States, the advocacy group in the United States. One of the benchmarks that we have to prove that we're capable of is to make sure that we're doing onboarding and orientation in a safe way for new clients. And so we have a really sophisticated way of making sure that that question is asked in a safe environment, and that sometimes people don't feel comfortable talking about that when they first arrive here. So our case managers, our therapists, our intervention staff are going to make sure that we circle back on those questions when it's the right time and the right place. What we won't do is simply ignore the question and say something like, well, we don't want to ask, or they don't know, and then we move on. So I just can't emphasize enough that sometimes it's not what is being done, but what's not being undertaken.
I appreciate both of your all's insights on that. Something that you are both, talking about is really the importance of having these when it comes to creating systemic and cultural change around this, having these conversations and, being committed to education and awareness around these issues, around the issues of facing this population are so important. We've had a few questions I've seen trickling in. What resources are out there around that? If you all, have anything to share. I know, Rick, you shared the report from the Human Rights Campaign, but what else is out there? Are there specific trainings? Are there specific organizations? Are there, reports that we can read to really help us get a better understanding of what this population is facing and what we can do about it?
Here's just a bit of statistic. LGBTQ plus youth and young adults are about 5 times more likely to commit suicide in their journeys. To complete suicide, we have to be aware of language as well. When we're dealing with these populations. Just a little bit of numbers right there, but when we look at these numbers and how atrocious this data is, we start wondering, like, well, we start to think something definitely needs to be done about this. Knowing that LGBTQ folks in the community are 5 times more likely to complete suicide is a very saddening thing, and that's less than what we know exists, right? Those are just the reported numbers.
Yeah, right on.
And with that being said, the first resource I want to point to is just the man in the mirror. We are that first resource for the young people as the supportive adult. We have the trainings and the experience to equip it to deal with our young people and engage with our young people. How are we supporting them? How are we talking with them? How are we empowering our young people?
Right on.
And I was just going to add to, hi, everybody. I am Emma Starrett-Hong. I am a faculty member at U of L. I am in the School of Social Work, and actually one of my areas of research is related to informal mentorship amongst young Black sexual minority males, and was invited to this meeting by Eltuan because we are both board members for Sweet Evening Breeze. So I'm so excited to be joining you all, so excited about this conversation. And so Carli, just in response to your question, there are quite a few trainings related to LGBTQ youth and young adults. And I guess it just depends on what sorts of trainings you're interested in. I know the university, U of L, has a lot. There's some related to physical health, some related to mental health. Lots of professional organizations have them. So our state social work association sometimes has trainings. The psychology State associations have actually is going to be having a conference coming up in September, and they're also going to be discussing working with clients who are LGBTQ. So also, I can put my email in the chat and feel free to contact me if there's a specific type of training or resource. I had also posted along with all of the many resources that are being posted in the chat, which is wonderful, something related to the Trevor Project. And also, oh, it's escaping me right now. Someone else probably knows the organization that surveys LGBTQ youth in high schools every year. I don't think it's GLAAD, but maybe it is GLAAD that I'm thinking of, that puts out a report every year. So just a place to start, but feel free to reach out to me as well.
That's super helpful, Emma. Thank you so much. And if you, and I see some other folks are adding some resources as well, so we can definitely compile those for some of the folks that were asking. I think this is, you know, as Eltuan and Rick are mentioning, education and awareness and just, you know, that cultural competency is so important. And so the more we can educate ourselves on this issue, you know, the better off we're going to be. Rick, did you have any other, you know, thoughts on resources or things that are out there?
I do. I put my email address there as well. Emma, thank you so much. I'm glad you have your email there. It's so great to have University of Louisville represented here this morning. I agree with Eltuan. Start with the person in the mirror. You know, you do not have to be a sophisticated expert on LGBTQ cultural competencies to be a resource for kids. I would say this though, right now, Children's Home of Northern Kentucky is literally the only organization that is certified by HRC for LGBTQ cultural competency. While I'm happy that we went first, I'm sad that we remain the only one. You child welfare providers who are here this morning, you know that there has been news in the state that's actually went all the way to the national level regarding a particular provider and whether or not a state contract would be signed with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. I would just say that not all providers approach culturally competent care the same way. I'm convinced that the people who are joining this call this morning are on the side of diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. And if you feel so motivated, I would like to have some company when it comes to not being the only LGBTQ culturally competent certified organization in Kentucky. So I see that you guys have already in the chat put down a link to All Children, All Families. So this is our innovator status seal. We have these throughout all of our 3 locations. All of our buildings you're going to see this logo for HRC, and you're going to see visual cues throughout our organization that helps LGBTQ youth and families feel safe and welcome here. That the All Children, All Families website, you're going to see a plethora of information, including an array of training materials that are already put together. So our 120 employees, in order for us to keep the certification, have to go through required trainings. And so many of those have been already put together by All Children, All Families. Just so that you know, this is not nuclear science to become certified with them. There are 10 benchmarks, and they're based around non-discrimination, staff training, how to welcome new clients, parent best practices, youth best practices, sustainability and capacity building, leadership and innovation. Those are the benchmarks for certification. And I would just really welcome anybody to email me who thinks that they might want to be a part of that movement. We have an opportunity. I'm working with a select group of child welfare providers right now, very casually, to see if there are other providers who want to join us, and we may have an opportunity for the National Human Rights Campaign senior leadership to come to Kentucky in August and to do a little pep rally cheerleading event for inclusive care of LGBTQ youth who are specifically in out-of-home care in Kentucky. So I'm more than happy to talk about All Children, All Families as a major resource for us.
Thanks for sharing that, Rick. That's exciting to hear kind of how the movement there, and hoping it gains traction throughout the rest of the state. So, we've talked a little bit about, what exists, some of those assets and resources out there. Let's talk a little bit about the gaps. Where are we seeing gaps in services, gaps in resources for our young people, our young LGBTQ plus people, and what solutions out there might address that, whether that's local solutions, policies, or state policies. What can we do to address some of those gaps?
So, in the point of transition, a young person might be removed from their home, whether they're given the boot, as I like to refer to the boot. I moved around a lot, or they decide to get out on their own, try things themselves. But ultimately, a lot of our young LGBTQ members end up on the street and homeless, which is a great purpose for Sweet and Breeze's existence. And we are a little different from other shelters as well. Whereas Salvation Army, for example, might have a trans individual come in, place them in a private room, but the bathrooms are not appropriated for that individual. So we want to create more environments that are appropriate for the community as a whole. And I do want to go back to the last question too, Carli, for a second. Mary had posted something in the chat, and this really, this is, thank you, Mary, for your engagement with our young people. The fact that they can come to you means that you come to them with a certain level of directness that gets their attention.
Thanks, Eltuan. And Rick, what are your thoughts around, some of the gaps in services or priorities, that could positively impact this population?
Well, I'll go back to how are we, the individuals that are taking the time to have this conversation, what is our commitment outside of our organizations, right? Back to that whole thing that we can put Band-Aids on kids until the cows come home, unless we start to really move upstream and start asking ourselves what's contributing to these adverse community environments that are leading kids to higher suicidal ideation rates, suicide rates, LGBTQ youth having a much higher likelihood of using substances ahead of their peers to deal with the internal pain that they often feel from social ostracization. So on that note, where are the gaps? Someone asked a question, what protections does Kentucky have for LGBTQ individuals? And I'm going to go to page 9 of the report that I just sent you. And so in that report, you'll notice that there's a map of the states that have certain anti-bullying statutes on the books, certain states that have enacted anti-bullying laws, non-discrimination language with non-discrimination language and statute. Kentucky is obviously not one of those states. So we have some work to do at the state level. So I think, what can we do to address some of the gaps in the system? I think we would start with things like making sure that our legislators know where we stand specific to things like conversion therapy. We actually have a bipartisan group of legislators right now working on banning conversion therapy in Kentucky. Most of the organizations here on this call are not using conversion therapy. I get it. But the fact that that is an opportunity to make a clear statement how destructive that practice is for LGBTQ youth. What happens if everybody on this call gets on the phone with their legislators and saying, what are we doing to ban conversion therapy in Kentucky? What are we doing to connect with our local fairness alliances? Louisville has an incredible fairness alliance. What are we doing to foster that in Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, the southern part of the state? Northern Kentucky has some pretty active groups. And then what are we doing to support these laws, these anti-bullying laws, and making sure specifically that transgender youth, I see some questions about what kind of protections are there for transgender youth to be able to participate in sports according to the gender that they identify with, and for those kind of things. Here's another gap that I will mention. Kentucky is a highly religious state. There's nothing to be ashamed about. That is something that we embrace in Kentucky. We are, per capita, we are one of the highest church attending states in the country. But I think one of the gaps we often experience, I'll say this as a gay man who was coming from a very religious family. 3 of my aunts were nuns. I wanted to help people when I was a kid in the way that immediately when I thought, how can I help people? I have to be a priest, right? That was the way, that was what was wired in me. And yet, so many times, there is this false dichotomy, this false conflict. Can I be out and proud of who I am, or should I be religious? And sometimes those are seen as diametrically opposed. And I'm here to say they're not. And what can we do specifically with our faith communities? Conversations that we can have with pastors and youth leaders to make sure that we are attending to the fact that there are discerning kids in our congregations and our faith communities that are trying to figure this out. What are we doing in our faith communities? I think that is one of the biggest gaps we have in Kentucky. Yes, let's focus on safe schools. Let's focus on proper legislation with our legislators. But what are we doing in our own faith communities to make sure that kids are not having to think that they have to check faith at the door if they want to be true to who they are in terms of their sexual orientation, gender identity? I think that is a huge bed of opportunity for us.
And what about the amendment where we get to choose what's right for us, just as individuals? This goes to this speaks to the Constitution, our constitutional rights. No one can tell you who you are. Why are you trying to make me go a place so they can tell me this for a long time? Like, I don't, I want to speak back to Rick's point earlier when he said, this is where we look at other people outside of ourselves as the issue. What is the problem, right? And it's not so much the individual, it's the misconceptions from outside, which can be traumatizing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have about 5 minutes left for the panel discussion. So I have one last question for Rick and Eltuan. We have, I think last I checked, 51 advocates on this call today who want to make a difference in this area. What do you all think is the top 1 or 2 ways that we as advocates can take part in advocating for our youth and young adults that identify as LGBTQ+. So whether that's on a personal level or whether that's on, looking and paying attention to state policy, what are 1 to 2 ways that we can really have an impact in this area?
Cut it out. When you see it, cut it out. The hate. I mean generally, live in love. Love yourself. Love your neighbor. I like to be very practical and break things down to what is simple to me, right? And at the basis of everything, at the basis of any of our relationships might be the love of something. So to start from that place of love and to be able to have conversations in moments of hate, to intervene and to help empower and help support and help change the narrative and the stigma, and start with love.
Right on, Eltuan. Carli, I'll just respond to that question quickly. I've already talked a lot about checking out All Children, All Families, checking out the 2018 research project from the University of Connecticut. I guess I would say, and this may sound really oversimplistic, trust your nose. Trust your nose. If something smells like prejudice and discrimination, no matter how it's packaged, and we package prejudice and discrimination in a whole bunch of packages, we will talk about things like bathroom safety. And I will even say this as a religious man. Sometimes we will talk about religious freedom. And sometimes what is really in that package, not all the time, but you have to trust your nose that if something smells like prejudice and discrimination and it's got pretty clothes on, don't trust your eyes, trust your nose. And how do we become kind of not just simply sponges soaking in these kind of messages, even from people in leadership positions, but to really trust our instincts to say, you know what, that sounds like prejudice. It sounds like discrimination. And I know as a helping professional, what that does to increase adverse childhood experiences. And that kind of language or that kind of attitude or that kind of theology or that kind of politics can have really devastating effects on kids. Trust your nose.
Yeah,
We all love someone in the LGBTQ community, someone in our family, someone that we've had relationships with for years that might just be a friend of ours. And we might not even know that they're in the community. But the point is, with that, not even knowing that you don't know everything, you should live in love.
yes, thank you to you both for, oh, I'm sorry, Eltuan, go ahead.
I'm sorry, my break's so long. Even though you don't know sometimes what someone's dealing with, it's better to approach them with the kindness that you feel like you deserve as well.
Yep, those are some very wise words from the both of you. We really appreciate you all joining us, Rick and Eltuan, and sharing your insights and your knowledge with us. I am going to kick it to my colleague Kish, who is going to close us out.
Thank you, Carli. Just a really rich conversation today, and I really want to thank Rick, Eltuan, and also Emma for sharing your knowledge and expertise in this area. This is only the beginning of the conversation. We at KYA, and probably many of you on this forum, are still learning about how we can best stand up for young people who identify as LGBTQ+. So stay tuned for more conversations like these. I think one of the things that really stuck with me from this conversation was love and leading with love. And Rick, I know you shared kind of like that real barrier that we have and gap around the faith community and supporting our young folks, and where that barrier is. And I think that is the issue, love, right? And I identify as a Christian, a follower of Christ, and seeing Jesus as love, this is my personal faith walk, understanding that means that you lead with that. That is, I don't understand how it's separate. So I think that's a great place to start in terms of solutions in our community, is really getting some of that knowledge. Eltuan, you mentioned get the education and sharing the education. I think that is huge for us to start moving the needle here. And when we talk about size and scope, I think, when you have a great number of folks that are being impacted by something, then it's you have more voices, you have more people at the table. And when the numbers aren't as large, then people seem to shy away from bringing up those voices to the table. And so I just wanted to kind of give us some understanding of the scope. And I know we've talked about the fact that our numbers are probably drastically off because of a lack of identification and comfortability being identified. But from stats of what was shared in our chat there, in Kentucky, with 144,000 people in Kentucky, 13 and older, identifying as LGBTQ plus, when you put that into a sense of understanding what that scope looks like, we're talking about the population of Bowling Green and Owensboro together, and we still haven't hit that number. So I just want us to really reflect on that when we talk about how we're going to lift up our voices to support that. There's a great number of folks who need us to join forces with them to do so. And one of the great ways that you can do this is by, I'm shouting out Jesse here and the rest of our team, and doing a fabulous job of putting things together for you. So after this forum, you get a really exhaustive list, if you will, along with the link for this discussion. And that's not just for you to recap what we talked about, but that's for you to share. So if you can share those emails with your network so that we can have more advocates, we can spread the knowledge, we can get more education, get more awareness, spread the love, then we hope that that's a way to change the narrative and lead toward love. So I'm going to also go ahead and shout out Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their support of today's Advocate Virtual Forum. A look ahead to upcoming forums next week. We will hear from state leaders. We have Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman and Kentucky Department of Education Commissioner Jason Glass, who will be joining us to talk about K-12 education. And the following week, we will continue that conversation by hearing from education partners from across the state. As always, like I just mentioned, that really robust and wonderful follow-up email will be sent to you, including a recording of today's forum. Please, please, please share that. And there will also be a link to sign up. So it makes it really easy for anybody that you share that with to go ahead and get connected and linked up. Thanks again for joining us, and hope you had a great time with this, just sitting in this, and hoping that you will take that next step of advocacy and get educated, spread the education. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.